Hey y'all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Today we're going to be looking at the late pick 4 for the Wednesday card in Keeneland. And this is part of our Keeneland card series where we're going to have a betting opportunity every day Keeneland races. So let's take a look and see what we can come up with. The first leg of the late pick 4 is the 5th race at Keeneland. It's a mile and an eighth on the turf, and it's an allowance N1X for 4-year-olds and up. Just right off the bat, I will say that this is one of those classic Keeneland races with a really big field, and there's a lot of different ways to go, and there's not a lot of real form-fitting horses in here, so we're going to try to find as much value as we can, and it's definitely a spread race. So let's just take a look at it. Number 1 is Spin Wheel. He's trained by Rusty Arnold, and Rusty usually is not so great with layoffs, especially long ones off the bench. This one prior to that had shown some halfway decent form, but it was more on the dirt, trying to get on the Derby trail unsuccessfully. So the switch to turf really didn't improve things a whole heck of a lot. So more than anything else, this one could be any kind coming off a long layoff, hasn't run since June. But since Rusty's not very good at them, I'm going to toss this one. I think we can find some better prices. F5 is by Brian Lynch. He's putting blinkers on this one. That's a decent angle for him. But the prior efforts on dirt were kind of uninspiring. And, this is Brian Lynch is pretty good with putting horses on turf for the first time. But I don't really see enough here that shows me that this one is really going to pop and get excited about. You could use if you want to, but I demand value. James Graham is a nice turf rider, but Brian Lynch is also not so great with long layoffs, and that's enough. This is another one coming up. Hasn't run since December, so I think we got better options elsewhere. Giroux is trained by Mike Maker, who's a specialist with long distances on turf. And if you look at this one's running lines, he has been running at 1.5 miles or 1.25 miles, classic distances. So this is a cutback for him, and it's coming off a layoff. So my first thought is maybe this is a tune-up for some other race. But more to the point, he does have Irad Ortiz on this horse, which immediately, you got to believe there's some good intentions. And judging by this horse's prior record, he's always in the money. Problem is he doesn't win. And it almost looks like he's got a case of second-itis. And if that happens, then there's really no way that this one can come out on top. So he's 2 for 20, and you're going to get a short price on this one because of the connections, particularly because of Irad. And the fact that this one hasn't won, didn't win at all last year, and hasn't won yet this year, hasn't run this year. I'm going to look elsewhere, and I think I think this is the kind of race that you have to demand value, and I don't think you're going to get it here. And this one hasn't demonstrated to me that he knows how to close the deal. So I'm going to look elsewhere. Use him if you want, but I think we got others that offer better value. JR's Gift is sort of a merry-go-round kind of horse. He just runs the same race every single time, and it's just never good enough. It's just his form is ineffective. He's been in this class for quite some time, and he's done okay, but he doesn't look like he knows how to win, in my opinion, and he's 1 for 22. So I'll look elsewhere to find a good price. Nicholas Jones is kind of interesting to me. He's only been running on synthetic and dirt, so he's never tried turf before. But if you look at that last race, it was a pretty marked improvement over what he had been doing previously, and he stepped up in class to do it. You see, he moved from a 30,000 claimer to an option 25 N1X. Now, he improved mildly in the stretch. He wasn't a factor. He wasn't going to threaten the top 3, but he's moving to turf. And, Pioneer of the Nile is a decent first-time turf sire. And if he is on the improve, then I expect that this one could very well pop again and have a good race. And at 30-1, why not take a shot? So I'm going to use this one because in this race, there aren't a lot of horses who know how to win. And this one, the fact that he's getting better, he may have the jump, and he's a hell of an overlay. So why not put him on the ticket? What Sadie is kind of strange to me. I think it's more the way they're riding him than anything else. It seems like this one is by See the Stars, one of my favorite European horses. He can run. He should run all day, and he should love long distances. The problem is, you see, most of the time when they stretch him way out, he doesn't do very well. Well, I think one of the reasons is that this one wants to be on the front end. Now, if you look at his running lines, you see pulled, and you see a little rank and whatnot. And how did he win his maiden? He won it on the front end. And you can see his running lines. He always wants to be up near the lead, and he always ends up backing up. And I think it's likely because he's eager to get going, and they're not letting him. So I think if they particularly in this race where there's no early speed whatsoever, this one would have a tactical advantage if he can get to the lead. Now, the Biscuit is a new jockey for him, and Adam Beskiza, and he's a nice jockey. And Sisterson, another one under the radar. So if anybody can bring the best out of him, I think they can. And at 20-1, I think he offers pretty good value. So why not give him a shot? So I'm going to use him because if they do put him on the front end, I think he could very well wire this field. Solid Country Gold is trained by Wayne Catalano, and he's got his old Chicago buddy Jared Loveberry on board. And they won a lot of races in Chicago together, and Wayne Catalano's a nice trainer. The last race, this one improved significantly when he moved to turf, and had some turf form prior to that. But this was a significant jump. And for a 4-year-old early in the year, you like to see that and figure maybe he's actually getting it. And I always love to see the note kept on, so that that means that he wasn't giving up in this race, and that another one is very likely for this one. So I think that again, another one at 15-1. I think there's very good value, and I think this one seems to be on the upswing. And he's pretty handy. He can be up near the pace, or he can go back either way. And he's one of the few horses in this race with multiple wins, which also you have to like. So it's 15-1. I think he's a good value, and I'm going to use him. Dripping Gold is a little on the disappointing side. He's burned the chalk in the last two. And he's, his connections, look at him. You get Sean McGahee, West Point Thoroughbreds, and Tyler Gaffalione. This one has demonstrated good form in the past and would certainly be competitive here. I do worry about his will to win, and that seems a little lacking. This one won at first asking, which you always got to love. And, look at this. They sent him right to a grade 1 in his second start. So I think they had some confidence in this one. But he's been a bit of a disappointment since then. So he definitely is a class fit here. I think you have to use him at 5-2. I think he would be shorter odds if he hadn't burnt chalk in his last two. But I think you have to put him on the ticket. And then second off the layoff, Shug will probably have this one running a pretty good race. So I think you definitely use Dripping Gold. Maintainer is another one kind of flying under the radar a little bit. Switching surfaces and off a bit of a layoff. A little bit of a freshening. I think the cutback in distance definitely helps. He run the last two at 1.25 miles. Didn't do bad. But I think this one might offer you some value at 20-1. I think this one is early enough in the career that another move forward is very possible. And I'm not as confident on this one as perhaps others, but the pedigree suggests that this one will be pretty good on turf. And, since he's only had one effort, that improvement is highly likely in the next one. So at 20-1, I think as good as any, and I would tend to use. Iconic Adventure, conversely, is, he's owned by Godolphin, and Bill Mott trains him well. That's usually a recipe for success on turf. But this one has been a little on the disappointing side. Took him 4 starts to break his maiden on dirt. And it looks to me like they're putting this one on turf to kind of find a place for him somewhere, because his dirt form is okay, but not world-beating. So I think I wouldn't say it's desperation, but it is maybe a move to try to get this one started, let's say. his first Ghost Sapper's first turf numbers are okay. They're not great. There was a time, oddly enough, that Ghost Sappers were running better on turf than they were on dirt. Go figure there. But I think, the fact that you have connections here with a horse that really doesn't seem overly eager to win and really good connections, that's going to make this one an underlay. So I'm going to roll a dice here and throw this one off because I think the value isn't there. And I think in this race, again, you've got to have value. Explosive. Don't you love these McAfee ads? Aren't they wonderful? How they ruin things for you. Explosive is an interesting case. He's been very popular with the claim box. Steve Asmussen's claimed him a couple of times. So has Doug O'Neill. He's got Florent Giroux on him. Mark Sims is the trainer. You sort of have to think about using this one based upon the figures. I mean, I think he is a fit here. The 11 hole isn't the greatest spot for him to be in, but I think he's a class fit. The big problem I've got is he's 0 for 9 on turf. And so, that sort of sticks in my mind. And at 6 to 1, I don't know if I want to. I'm on the fence about investing in this one. I could see using him for sure. And if you want to, I wouldn't talk you out of it, but I'm probably going to leave him off just because I think he could factor in this race, but I'm not confident he'd be a win candidate since he's 0 for 9 on turf and has never cashed a winning ticket with them. So use at your own risk, I would say. Policy option, what can you say? 4 races in a row, the chalk in all 4, and all 4 didn't factor or was in second place. There's a little bit of a thought of seconditis when you've got 8 seconds and thirds as opposed to 3 wins and 33 starts. Got Bejarano on. That's definitely a help. But again, this is one you're getting a shorter price than really is deserved given the last 4 efforts. He's a class fit. I'm not going to deny that. And if you want to use him, go ahead. But I think there's better prices, and I certainly wouldn't talk you out of it. But I just want to have value in this race. It's just the way I feel about it. I think the shorter priced options have holes in them, and so let's find a price. And the also eligibles, Masai Warrior isn't a bad option. He showed some ability by winning his first out at turf. Did take him 11 tries before then to finally get it, but it looks like obviously that was the right move to switch his surface. His next out had a pretty good effort against winners for the first time, which isn't always easy. So you got to like to see that. 7 to 2 to me is a little short in this field, but I could see using him. If he draws in, I would consider it. And again, I'd leave it up to you as if you want to do it. Always Above is, I think, speed figure-wise, is a very good fit in this race. And you look at the back class, and this one has some graded stakes on his record, and he didn't do that bad. The problem he has is he's just terrible out of the gate. He's just really, really slow. And so he would have to he'd have to have a pace meltdown. You don't really have one coming in this race, but I think class-wise he's a fit. And if you can get him at better than 6 to 1, you might want to consider him. Again, he's another one of many in here that I'm on the fence with. And like I say, I want a price in this race. So this one, I'm, use at your own risk, I'll say. Sailor's Return isn't good enough, and he just broke his maiden after 20 tries, so that's not enough for me, so he's a toss. And Arabian Prince isn't much better. He's coming out of a $30,000 claiming race off a layoff. They're raising him in class, and I don't see enough here to tell me that he will move forward or improve enough to significantly factor in this race, so I'm throwing him out if he draws in. The second leg of the late pick 4 is the 6th at Keeneland. It's a starter allowance for 3-year-olds running 6.5 furlongs on the dirt. Number 1 is Odds on Tony. And note in the configuration, if you will, before I forget it, there's a little bit of a gap between the start and the turn. So horses who don't get out really quickly might tend to get caught, shuffle back a little bit. And I think odds on Tony just might be one of those. He doesn't really stack up speed figure wise, and he's been slowly improving like Kenny McPeaks do. But I just don't see enough here. They had to drop him to a maiden claimer to get his diploma. I don't think that's ever a good thing. Well, sometimes it is, but this case, I don't see enough. He's got Brian Hernandez on him, his best jockey, but I think there's others in here that appeal more. So odds on Tony is a toss. Soft Pants is trained by Joe Sharp, who's a nice conditioner. You can see this one went for $150,000 at the Keeneland sale, so there was some apparent quality there. He has done. He doesn't really seem to be getting any better. They had to drop him, and it took him 3 bites at the maiden 50 level to finally get his diploma. And his first start against winners with Counter Spy and Fight Fiercely, who were in this race, he really didn't factor a whole lot. I mean, he had a decent fourth, but the bigger problem to me is that it was a speed favoring track, and he was a front runner, and he folded late in the race. So he had things his way on the engine, and as he did when he got his diploma, and he wasn't able to stack up class-wise. So this one may take another start or two, but I'm not going to wait for it, so he's gone. Number 3 is Chambers Bay. It's a really big class jump they're asking out of this one. They're showing a really big leap of faith from a maiden 15 into this field. He's just not good enough class-wise, and I just even if he takes a leap forward, I don't see him factoring, so you throw him out. Hill of Terror is a little interesting in that he's coming from synthetic, going back to dirt, and as you know, synthetic to dirt is an angle I love. But he had a pretty low class maiden 15 to graduate to get his maiden, and he went against winners at Turfway Park. Nothing against them, but it's not quite the same class level as Keeneland. And he finished an okay fourth, but really wasn't a factor. So I don't think there's quite enough here to get me excited about this one. Although I might think about him underneath because synthetic to dirt, and he is cutting back in distance, that maybe you get this one underneath at a price. So I would think about him in those terms, but not as a win candidate. Captain Jack is intriguing for a couple reasons. Number one, being trained by Ian Wilkes to get your win as your second start, particularly after that dreadful inaugural effort, is a pretty good sign that this one has some quality to me. Because Ian Wilkes horses, he tends to take a lot of time before they start showing anything, and this one was pretty precocious. So I think that's a really good sign. I don't think this one's probably going to have enough to be a win candidate, but I think if he takes another step forward, which is entirely possible, I think he factors underneath at a price, and I would consider him in that fashion for sure. Number 6 is Money Run. This one is 7-5 on the morning line. That immediately, our eyes should pop out and be really looking at this one. You see they've got a Rod Ortiz on them, so clearly there's some intent here. If you look at this one's running lines, Beyer-wise, he had a career high in 92. That would beat anything in this field easily. But it was in the mud. And you can notice his last 2 races, he was the heavy chalk and didn't come through either time. Now, one of them, apparently he just backed right up, and he was going against Frogtown, who's a pretty good horse, and Machine Gun Man won his next start. So it was a pretty good field. And the last one as well, he kind of ran into Machine Gun Man again, who's making a move forward. So I wonder about the will to win with this one. You can't not use him because if he does run back to that figure, he dusts his field. He also, I will note that that 92 he got, not only was it in the mud, but it was in a pretty lousy field for an option 50. And you notice they haven't moved him up in class. This is kind of a drop in class in a way. So that I think they're trying to get him back on the winning path, and they think maybe dropping him in class will do it. So you got to use Money Run, but don't be surprised if somebody comes up and beats him because I'm not sure how much will to win this one has. Street Swag is an interesting one as well. He's coming off his career Beyer, and he did it at a much higher class level than today. And it was a prolonged drive. He was in the race all the way, and he was still coming late. but he weakened the touch, and I think that had to do with the fact that he was running just against a better field in general. In this field, I think he gets a softer spot, and at 6-1, he's a really good price, I think. Got Tyler Gaffleone on him, and I think he's a win candidate, and I think we should definitely use him. Counter Spy is coming third off the layoff, so it's third in his form cycle, which is always good. His last race, he popped pretty well, posting a career high in an option 50, and he got a pretty good second. He was caught. That's the thing you got to think about. But part and parcel with that is you look at his last three starts. He was short odds each time. And yes, he finished second in a row 3 times. But the margin of victory was less each time. I think this one's getting it. He was at a route last time. He's cutting back to a sprint in a lower class level. And I think you have to consider this one definitely a win candidate. John Oxley usually has good stock. It's a good outfit. He had Monarchos some years ago, you might remember. And he's by Gunrunner too. So there's definitely some quality here, I think, for sure. So I think Counter Spy is one that you definitely use. Fight Fiercely came out of the same race as Counter Spy, and you see that he posted a career high as well. But there's a little thing about him that gives me pause. Number one, that option 50 in synthetic. I mean, it was synthetic, so okay, maybe he didn't like it. We can sort of forgive him. And Transect is a pretty good horse. But if you go back to when he broke his maiden, believe it or not, that is a drop in class from the maiden claimer for 150,000 he ran in earlier. So they kind of had to drop him in class a little bit to get his maiden. Now, he did show improvement 3 straight races to get, and maybe he didn't like the synthetic, so you can see that possibly he's on the upswing. I'm just not sure that he can stack up with some of the others in here, and I think he's going to be a little short for what he actually is capable of. So Fight Fiercely, I'll leave it up to you whether you want to use him, but for me, he probably would be a toss. The third leg of the pick 4 is the 7th at Keeneland. It's an allowance N2X for fillies and mares, 4-year-olds and up, and it's run on the turf at 1 1/16. And the thing to think about an N2X is there's not a lot of horses run at this race because usually after they get past the N1X, they're into stakes races. So sometimes you find really good horses come back into this condition because they're still eligible for it. And a lot of times it can be used as a tune-up race or a confidence builder or what have you. So just something to keep in mind with this type of race. Number 1 is Take a Stand. Has some back class. Took a little while to break her maiden, but even though she got her diploma through disqualification, came right back and won at the N1X level. And you always like to see that with a horse. Now, most of her running's been done on dirt, but you note the Miss Revere, she finished third behind a pretty good field. So there's some quality on turf here. You're moving from dirt to turf again, and that might be a pretty good angle here. You know, you see she didn't do very well off the layoff, even with a Rod Ortiz aboard, but she may have needed a race. So this is one you can kind of think about as a possibility. 10-1 is decent value, and Vicky Oliver is pretty good second off the layoff. So this is one you might want to think about. I'm not sure I'd put this one as a win candidate, but might be a contender here, and you might think about for underneath. Excuse me. Number 2 is Sweet Serenade. I look at this one, and she seems to have plateaued. You see, she spent a lot of time in the optional 62K class and hasn't got a win. She didn't win at all last year and is 0 for 2 to start this year. And I don't see any progression here or anything to get me real excited aside from Roger Atfield as the trainer. But it's third off the layoff. But again, I don't see enough to see a progression happening, and I don't think this one's a win candidate, so she's a toss. Excuse me. One Time Mo is a curious one to me. Why the move to dirt? This horse was doing really well and improving, getting better. Won first time against winners around 2 turns, and all of a sudden the switch to dirt. Or to turf rather. So that's kind of weird to me. I think she could she could factor in this race based upon her pedigree, but I think it's a pretty big class test for doing something for the first time. So I would tend to leave this one off the tickets, though. Jared Loveberry is a nice jockey on turf, and but I just kind of have a feeling that this one may have to wait a race or two. Woohoo, Jackie Blue, song title from the 70s. And those of us old enough to remember it. Lindsay Schultz is a good trainer, and Julian Repperou's pretty good on turf. You can see the trainer, Lindsay Schultz, he's 42% second off the layoff. Now, that's a really important when you consider this one just ran her career high off of the layoff. Granted, it was on dirt at 6 furlongs, but I think it's a sign that this one's in pretty good form. You see that she's finished in the money in every one of her starts except one. And granted, that was on turf in this class. But the fact that that was done when she was 3 years old, perhaps she's capable of better at 4. I tend to believe that. And at 30-1, I think she's a pretty good overlay. And I might even put this one on the ticket for a win. But I think regardless, you definitely want to think about using this one, particularly underneath. Under One Sky is the big problem I have with this one is that she has run for a tag. And that's her best efforts have been for a tag. And now she's going into a non-claiming race, and it's a pretty good step up in class. Yes, she just won an optional claimer 25 at N1X, so that's a decent win, but it was on synthetic and it's not turf. Her buyers look a little light to be competitive in this field, so I wouldn't include this one. Choctaw Bingo is kind of interesting. It's in pretty good form. You can see 3 straight wins in 2 seconds. So before going to the layoff, the problem is it was all done at Indiana Grand, and that's not Keeneland, and this would be a big step up in class. And there's too many others I like better, but you might want to think about using this one under because you are going to get some value, and clearly this one likes to compete. So, but not a win candidate. Boma has some back class, and despite the layoff, didn't do bad in her first effort on Mile on the Turf at the N2X level. She's got a great trainer. You know, Wayne Catalano's been around a long time, and Corey Landry, they win at 38% together. So I think there's definitely some intent here. Would need a step up for sure, competing against the others in this field. So I think you use this one more underneath at a price. But I don't consider this one to be a win candidate. Sister Luann's got the advantage of being really the only front runner in this field. So I expect her to be on the engine, and she's got a Rod Ortiz on her, so clearly there's some intent here. I think she's run well off of layoffs, so that's also a good sign. We'll need to step it up a little bit. But, you know, if a couple of the more prominent ones don't fire because for one reason or another, this one could very well wire the field. And if you get 8-1, I think that's a pretty good price. So you might consider putting this one on the ticket because of the tactical advantage of being the lone speed. Blissful is trained by Cherie DeVoe, and this one is she's pretty good with a little bit of a layoff, and this one is get about roughly a month and a half off. Got Luis Saez on. He couldn't ask for a better jockey. He knows this one. Granted, they didn't do terribly well beforehand, but this one is last race was pretty good, and she did pretty well against N1X Company. So she's moving through the progressions. Won at first asking at Saratoga, which is always a really good sign. And so I think that this one, I think you got to use because it looks like that she's poised and ready to jump to the next level. So Blissful would be a use. Mademoiselle Nova had some form 2 years ago, but has fallen off a cliff basically. And I just has forgotten how to run or something. I don't know what it is, but I can't consider this one to be a serious contender for any part of this race. Flirting Bridge, number 11, is the even money favorite, and for good reason. I mean, you look at her running lines, came over from Europe and didn't miss a beat. Won at the N1X level right off the bench from Europe, and you got to be very impressed with that. A lot of times they take a starter too. Has been stakes placed at Woodbine. On the EP Taylor, you mean finishing third behind Moira and Rougier is no sin whatsoever. So I think this one is clearly the class of the field you've got to use for sure. The only thing is this may be a tune-up for another stakes race. Certainly they're pointing this one to an N2X allowance race. So that's something you maybe want to keep in the back of your mind. And I wouldn't talk you out of singling this one for ticket size. But I just have that little thing in the back of my mind about maybe this is a tune-up. So if you want to spread a little bit, I wouldn't blame you. Lady Pucci is, she didn't do very well in the Miss Revere, and she hasn't really done that well at States Company. She's passed the N1X condition at Keeneland, so that's something to be sure. But she's had a couple of subpar efforts, and then it was followed by a long layoff, and that is automatically a red flag. Now, she's trained by Kenny McPeak, and Brian Hernandez does stay aboard, as opposed to one of the also eligibles that McPeak has. So that's a little something, but I'm going to wait one on this one because I think there's some real negatives that you have to take into account that don't make her eligible for our tickets here. The also eligibles very quickly. Texas Magic simply isn't good enough. Prior turf efforts were not very promising. They were okay, I guess, but really seems to have fallen off form since those days on synthetic, and I just don't see this one as being a player here. Lovely Princess is a Ken McPeak charge, and did pretty well in the Miss Revere in her last start on turf, but then went to the bench for quite some time, and that's got to be a cause for concern. And the way Kenny McPeak generally runs his horses is, they improve a little bit every time. And if you look at this one's running lines, it's exactly what she's done. So it took her 4 starts for the maiden. It took her two starts for the N1X. And probably it's going to take another couple to graduate out of this class. So this one I'm going to wait on, and I won't use on the tickets if she draws in. The final leg of the late pick 4 is the 8th at Keeneland, and it is a starter allowance for 4-year-olds and up. It's run on the dirt at 7 furlongs. Number 1 is Caramel Chip, a very deserving 6-5 morning line favorite. He's running at class levels, and his speed levels tower over the rest of this field. The only way he doesn't win this race is if he doesn't show up. So if he does get drawn back or something else, but I find that highly unlikely. I think this one is an obvious single, particularly with Erod Ortiz on board, and I would use him accordingly as a win candidate. Gormley's got game. You can see if you compare his buyers to Caramel Chip, he's not even close to that level, nor is he at a class level that's commensurate with competing in this race. His last start was at a $10,000 claim level, and he didn't do too hot in it, and I just don't think this one's good enough, and I think he's a toss. Improbable Story has a little bit of value to me. He's been getting better with every single start. Even when he switched from synthetic to dirt, he's been running mostly on routes. So this is a cutback, which I think is a good angle. And I might consider using this one. I don't know that he's good enough to beat Caramel Chip, but I think you could definitely use him under. And at 8-1, that's a pretty decent price. So that's the way I'd use him. Number 4 is Crosstown Shootout, another one that just really doesn't stack up in any way. Has been running on synthetic, but even with a move to dirt, I don't see that this one would put up numbers that are even close to competitive, so I would toss. Keen on You, more of the same. If you look, hasn't got a buyer past the 60s level, albeit on synthetic most of his career. Still, even with a move forward, I don't think this one's good enough at all. So Keen on You is a toss as well. Ill's Big Secret would possibly be competitive in this race if he didn't need a break in the worst way. Now, if you look, you see what he was doing last year, late last year. He was doing okay. He had some pretty competitive numbers. Ran third in a restricted stakes race, but he's been stuck at the starter allowance level at Mahoning Valley mostly. And while he's finishing in the money, you'd like to think he could do a little better if they gave him some time off and let him freshen up a little bit. So I don't like this one here. I think he's just outclassed, and he's a toss. Two Worlds is kind of interesting. This is a really good angle for Brittany Vandenberg, and she's got her A rider Chris Amy aboard, who's a nice jockey. I remember him from Arlington Park quite a bit. Route to Sprint is a really good angle for her. And always love horses cutting back. You see, this one likes to run on the front end. Caramel Chip does not. Caramel Chip likes to come off the lead. So if this one can get to the lead and perhaps with a little break, if maybe there's some traffic issues for Caramel Chip coming out of the chute at 7 furlongs, you never know. But I think it's more likely this one is competitive underneath. And I would use in that fashion. But if you want to try to beat Caramel Chip, this might be a good alternative. Vittori is all-weather to dirt is always a plus, especially when it's cutting back in distance. But if you look, this one's been running in nickel claimers, and that's just not going to cut it here, especially with buyers in the 60s. This one was competitive early last year, but apparently has really gone off form. And maybe the return to dirt would be a help, but I don't. I just don't see this one as stacking up. So Vittori Kid is a toss. Tis Our Turn. This one hasn't won in 2 years. Need I say more? This one just doesn't stack up. Runs on the early engine. There's others more suited for that, and it is Route to Sprint. But again, this one just doesn't seem to know how to win. And I'm not going to take a chance that he'll find out today, so I'm tossing. High Heater is kind of interesting. He's a California import. He's been running at Santa Anita and Los Al and Del Mar. His numbers are fairly competitive, and I could see him being competitive in this race. I just don't. Again, it just doesn't really stack up to Caramel Chip. Maybe if you want it, you're just resolute about beating Caramel Chip, you put this one on the ticket to try to beat. But we always want to keep in mind sometimes those California numbers are a little gaudy compared to what they actually reflect. And this one's been running at a little higher class levels in some instances, so maybe that's a plus. But I don't know. I just find it really hard to go against Caramel Chip. I think this one you use under, but I don't know if he's good enough to beat. Maybe, again, if your heart's set on it, maybe this is one you think about putting on your ticket to beat Caramel Chip. So here's what our ticket looks like for the late pick 4. Now, I've given you a couple of different ways to go because I think there's 2 potential singles in this race. And I'll leave it up to you as to which one you would prefer, and you can govern accordingly. But for the 5th race, we're going to use 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we'll see about scratches. And the 13 and 14, if either one or both draw in, I might consider using one of them, and hopefully one of the other horses in the 5th will scratch. Number 6, the 6th race, we're going to use 6, 7, 8. I don't, Mr. Money, or forget what the 6. Anyway, I'm not confident that he's a really good single, and I think maybe we want to use it, have some defensive options. Number 7, 7th race, you can single Flirting Bridge if you want to, but I think I'm not sure that he's going to be tuned up all the way for this one. It might be a warm-up to a stakes race, so I might think about the 7, 8, and 9 using as well. And in the 8th, I think Caramel Chip's probably the best single of all of them, so you can leave him at all alone. And if you do that, then basically what you're looking at is a 5 by 3 by 4 by 1. So 5 times 3, 15 times 4 is 60. It's a $30 ticket on a 50-cent wager. And of course, if you use Ticket Maker, you can make it lower than that. You want to get bold. You might want to try two different tickets. One singling floating bridge in the 7th, and then have another ticket where you single caramel chip in the 8th if you potentially want to do that. I'm not sure. I'll leave that up to you how to do it. I think the majority of the value is in the 5th and the 7th races, and some in the 6th. So I think we spread for those reasons, but hopefully we can get an overlay home that'll turn this into a decent payout. So you can see from the ticket, one of the things when I see a potential for two singles to happen in a race, or two really short prices to come in, you definitely want to be thinking about ticket size. And I might consider trying to put a small ticket in and maybe boost up the dollar amount. And just be bold, and if it happens, great, and if it doesn't, you're not out a whole lot. But there is, with Flirting Bridge and Caramel Chip in the last two legs, you got some potential for some really short prices. So that's why I think the 5th you definitely want to spread. I think that's the one most likely to have some value in it. And Mr. Money in the 6th could come in, and then it's just a really short ticket all the way. So if you don't spend a whole lot, then your ROI will be greater. Those are just some of my thoughts. I hope my analysis will help you come up with your own ticket. Nonetheless, we're going to do this every day Keeneland has races. We'll have a different wagering opportunity to look at. So be on the lookout for Thursday's card as well as Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And the Lexington will be happening later this week, and we'll have an analysis for that as well. If you like what you see here, please like and subscribe, and really appreciate all you guys tuning in and staying with us. I'm really liking this community, and like I always ask you, keep those comments coming. I'd love to hear from you guys. And we've got some interesting insights from a lot of different corners of the world. So I think that's pretty cool, and I hope you do too. So I'll be talking to you soon. And until then, be well.